The second key input to good digital learning design are the design parameters. So there are 4 key design parameters where we have to make some decisions. The first is, are people going to learn alone or in groups? And the second, are they going to learn in formal or informal ways? So let's just unpack the first 2 design parameters here. So we know people learn alone and in groups. We know they learn in formal and informal ways. So if you look at this, the right side, the right half of this equation, top right quadrant, is formal guided paced cohort. That means your training is formal. There's a scope and a sequence to the material. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. There's a guide, an expert guide, or faculty or teacher, whichever you prefer to call it. But there's a guide, there's a pace, somewhere you have to be each day, some pacing to the material, to the journey. And there's a cohort, there's a group of people doing that journey together. You could imagine hiring a guide to take a trek up to the top of a mountain and getting to base camp would be an example of a guided paced cohort. That's the way you would think of a college class, for instance, but this is a group experience, formal guided paced cohort. In the bottom right quadrant is informal group learning. We call that a community of practice. There's no beginning, no middle, no end. And in the community of practice, there's peer-to-peer and peer-to-expert interaction. If you go to learning alone, if that's part of your design, and this is outside of what we do here at CorpU, because we only focus on the right-hand side, but on the left-hand side, there's a huge industry of people that make formal, self-paced e-learning, things you do alone. When there's a known right answer, I want to teach you how to code in HTML or program in Java or use the Adobe Creative Suite to produce beautiful outcomes. You can use e-learning from the top left quadrant and follow the formal. There's a course, it has beginning, a middle, it has an end, and you do it all by yourself. You're connecting people to that content when you build e-learning for the top left quadrant that they can do alone in the flow of work, and they can do it reactive. And the bottom left is informal, alone. This would be an example of what you do if you would sort of go to YouTube and do a how-to video. How to fix a leaky pipe would be an example. It's reactive. It could be in the flow of work. You might be saying, how do I close out an invoice or close out the end of a month in an accounting system? You would be in the bottom left. You're sort of reactive. You're getting an answer. It's informal learning. Bottom left would be an example, would be watching a TED Talk. So if you're watching a TED Talk, perfect example. So formal versus informal, group versus alone. In the CorpU guided learning journey, it is a guided pace cohort with formal intervention. That's the design, as well as then a community of practice for the informal space for learning community to develop and evolve so that they're working together, generating new knowledge together in that space. Okay, so that's principles 1 and 2 for the design parameters. The third parameter is the degree of blending of synchronous and asynchronous. So there's lots of good research on why and how you blend these. The model we follow at CorpU is asynchronous learning for 4 days, 30 minutes a day, days 1, 2, 3, and 4, followed by a 1-hour live virtual synchronous session on day 5. So on days 1 through 4, you can be at any time, any place, any pace, as long as you're within that day. And on day 5, you've got to be there at a specific time and place virtually. And if you miss it, it gets recorded and saved back in. So anybody that misses the live virtual session can still watch that. But you've got to blend them. We kind of like in a 3-hour week, which we think is optimum. The research points to about 30 minutes a day, about 3 hours a week is kind of the perfect amount of learning to make sure that it's integrated with learning and doing and practice and feedback from a coach. So that's kind of the 2/3, 1/3 in the degree of blend of synchronous and asynchronous. And then the final is cohort size. So what is the peer-to-peer and peer-to-expert ratio that you have to look at? Our research has found that optimum results, and this is about 10 times the completion rates of typical e-learning, happen when cohorts are in the size of between 20 to 70 with a sweet spot around 50. So 20 to 70, sweet spot around 50. You'll get maximum interaction peer-to-peer. It really powers up good structured dialogue, and with an expert moderator that keeps that conversation going, and a subject matter expert or an expert guide. If you have 2 guides with 50 to 70 people, it works really, really well. And the research has shown if you want to get real high impact outcomes, you've got to engage people with active learning, which we'll talk more about in the design video. But in this, suffice it to say that a guided journey with a group and a pace and a cohort doing active learning projects, you're going to drive the highest level of engagement, peer-to-peer and peer-to-expert. So those are the 4 design parameters for designing good digital learning.